First problem, as I mentioned, is a complexity problem. Things are just too complicated to get a handle on. And that actually has serious consequences, because what happens to everyone eventually is that their lives become so complicated that they die. So, and many terrible things can happen to you on the way to dying as well that are complexity related, right? You can develop a serious illness that you can't get a handle on. You can hit what would you call, an impasse in your relationship that you cannot get past and see no way out of. That happens to people quite frequently. People who are suicidal, for example, they often feel like they've been backed into a corner, that they have no options. They have no good options. No matter which way they turn, there's something terrible to face, and they can't see any way out of it. And sometimes that's more true than you'd like to think, because we also tend to like to think that people's problems are primarily psychological, but they're not. And that's one thing you learn quite rapidly as a clinician, is that most of the time people don't come to you because they have mental illness. They come to you because they have a complexity management problem. Their lives have got out of hand on them, and they don't know how to get them back under control. And so all sorts of things can do that. And then, of course, that can make you anxious or depressed. It can trigger all sorts of illnesses. But the fundamental problem is still that things have got beyond you. And that actually has a psychophysiological cost that isn't merely psychological. You have a limited amount of capacity from a resource perspective to deal with emergent complexity. There's just not enough of you. You'll exhaust your psychophysiological resources if you get into a situation that's too complex. Well, that's what the idea of chaos represents. It represents that underlying complexity that can manifest itself at any time. And it can manifest itself, for example, if you wake up in the morning and you feel an ache of some sort, and perhaps it's nothing, and you ignore it, but it gets worse, and you end up going to the hospital, and you find out, perhaps, for example, that you have pancreatic cancer, and you're going to live for 6 months, and that's the end of that. And so it's at that moment that you break through the thin ice that everyone walks on, and you see what's underneath. And what's underneath is the ineradicable complexity of life. And that's chaos. And now, it's taken people a long, long time to get a grip on this conceptual, what would you call it, conceptual schema. And human beings have done it mostly with image and story before they've been able to do it in any articulated manner. And so there are a set of images that represent this underlying chaos. And one of them is the dragon of chaos, precisely that. And that's the dragon that the hero goes out to confront. That's the symbol of the unknown. It's the thing that lurks underneath. It's the thing that also guards treasure, because in the unknown there's possibility. Also the water that was there that we talked about in the Mesopotamian creation myth, the water that's there at the beginning, both the salt and the fresh water, is often a symbol of pre-cosmogonic chaos. Often people have dreams, for example. Some of you have had this dream, I suspect. You'll dream that you're in a house that you know well, and all of a sudden you discover a new room, or a set of new rooms, or maybe a set of rooms in the basement. And often the rooms are not well organized, and they're full of water. Those are very common things. And what that means is that you've broken through the constraints of your conscious self-understanding to a new domain of possibility, but a new domain that needs a tremendous amount of work. It says, well, here's a new part of you, but it's not well developed. It's flooded. It's flooded with chaos, essentially. And it's water, I think, partly because chaos is not only what you fall into when you're not expecting it, but it's also the unknown that you confront forthrightly and generate new things out of. And water is a symbol of life, especially in the desert. And of course, life is dependent on water. And so water is a natural symbol to utilize when you're talking about something that's life-giving but also potentially deadly. Because a little bit of water, well, that's a drink, but a lot of water, that's a shipwreck, right? And so, and those are the extremes. Now, there are accounts that are sort of subtexts in Genesis and elsewhere in the Old Testament of God